Hello and welcome to Beacon of Creation, a weekly podcast on game design through the lens of Magic the Gathering. I'm Juliet.
And I'm Kayiu.
So, I recently just finished reading the entirety of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Okay,
which is
we're starting off with a flex. Let's get it.
A book with nearly as many chapters as there are cards in an older Magic set that I imagine some of our audience may literally never have heard of, Portal Three Kingdoms.
Yeah, because I think when people think of older sets, they think Alpha, Beta, Unlimited. Maybe they think of
Urza's Legacy.
Yeah, I've heard of Homelands. Isn't that a funny meme? But yeah, the Portal is one that I think sometimes gets lost in those conversations.
The Portal products, of course, were targeted for a newer audience, and Portal Three Kingdoms in particular was targeted to try to get a newer audience in Asia. That was their stated goal. And it's kind of funny to think about because after Portal Three Kingdoms, we went a really long time in Magic where Magic focused on its own IP. And now we've come back around to the modern Universes Beyond and Secret Lair and even full sets in the style of a Lord of the Rings set. And so my question for you, Kayiu, is Portal Three Kingdoms the original Universes Beyond set?
Ooh. I think that you can make arguments both ways. The argument for is pretty obviously what you stated. It is adapting an existing, let's call it IP, I think it's functionally an IP, into Magic. I think the argument against would be, I think lots of what makes Universes Beyond, I think what makes it tick for players in the modern day is that these are, I guess, living IPs is one way to put it. It's stuff that is not public domain. It's not old. It is stuff that is actively being released or worked on around us for the most part. There's a range of time periods that we're seeing Universes Beyond products come from in terms of source material, but I think that Portal 3 Kingdoms is definitely one of those things where it's just so old where I think that it's I don't know if what the legal considerations were around that. I'm pretty sure there weren't any, right? Well, for each of these, there are at least some sort of legal protections on each of these that preclude this having happened without some sort of explicit contract or deal occurring, right? While that isn't a huge deal to how the products themselves play out, I think it is kind of an important element for how it functions in public consciousness of players.
Also, I played a little trick on you, which is Portal 3 Kingdoms isn't the original Universes Beyond set. That arguably is Arabian Nights.
Oh, darn it. I fell for it. I was like, yeah, old cards. They're all old. Anything that came out before I started playing is just in that nebulous thing of old enough. Yeah, oh my god, Arabian Nights, yeah.
Arabian Nights came out in 1993. Portal 3 Kingdoms came out in 1999. It's a 6-year gap. That is a pretty considerable time.
Well, one was before I was born and one was after I was born, you know?
And we'll leave that as a exercise for the listener to guess which one. If you want more of that type of humor, go check out our episode earlier this summer, Beacon of Tomorrows. It's Tim and I's time travel and time warp cards discussion pod. It's pretty good. The thing is, there's actually a few things that seem to work pretty well for the Portal 3 Kingdoms set. I think replacing flying with horsemanship might be kind of a little bit of a meme these days, especially since we haven't really seen a return to horsemanship. But given that these cards weren't originally planned to be legal standard wasn't standard then, but you know what I mean, back in the day, there's a bunch of designs that we then see reflected in kind of canon Magic and kind of universes within later. And I have to laud the idea of we're going to make Magic super simple, even if I think just basic lands, just sorceries, and just creatures and any activated abilities you can only do in your first main phase. That does kind of eliminate a lot of the more interesting things that Magic can do. But at the same time, reading through the book, I was like, wait a minute, I know what's about to happen to Shinyi because I know the card Burning of Shinyi. It's a cube card. It's about to get that town is about to be set on fire, or borrowing 100,000 arrows as a Kongming sort of tactic. It's an interesting thing. I really keep circling ways to kind of advance the Magic design by 25 years while still keeping some parts of it as simple as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as a goal, right? Because to a degree, we're seeing Wizards moving away from simplicity for new players. Not in like a completely bad way, but I like this is as Commander has become like one of the most popular casual play formats. There's sort of like this increasing thing of like limited play doesn't need to be like we've seen this is both for like regular gameplay reasons and for new player comprehension reasons, but like we've moved away from vanillas and even to for the most part French vanillas. We've seen like the general explicit increase of complexity and power in limited in recent years. We have like, and again, you're talking about Universes Beyond, these products explicitly marketed for people who aren't into Magic are also using like a lot of mechanics from across Magic's history in a way that appeals to enfranchised players, but is sometimes like, I would say, not necessarily inaccessible, but it's definitely putting a little bit more burden on new players to read up and understand. But we're finding that new players are sometimes like, yeah, I can do that. It's a question of, is simplicity always a thing, or can you trade off simplicity for resonance as a way to get in new players if you're working with like a specific already known medium, right? Like you, especially for like, I think a lot about the Doctor Who cards, where it's like, look, I don't know what any of this means in Magic text, but I watched this episode, and so I can kind of infer the events that are happening, like for like the sagas. Meanwhile, of course, if you're a Magic player, you're like, this is. Meanwhile, I definitely seen some Magic players like look at it and be like, well, this is kind of nonsensical. I don't know what's going on here. Like I know what mechanically is going on here, but I don't know what this is supposed to imply as much, which is a really interesting disconnect because I feel like it's often the opposite. There's some things that are so ingrained in like the mechanical lexicon of players where it's like, yeah, if you tap a creature, it's like sleeping or like it's knocked out. For a new player, it's like that might not come across until you see a few cards with it and like get into that. Yeah.
I think it's interesting to think about leveraging familiarity as a like offset to complexity. That if it was just like, okay, here are creatures from Bant, it's a made up fantasy place, but like we've got these different rules there, but they're opposite this other shard and everything. Players can be like, okay, I can vaguely remember that these things are 3 colors, but which ones are they? And like until they have built those and like, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but like the identifying neurons, you know what I mean? Like until they can go, oh, I identify this, therefore I can easily remember it. You want to simplify cards. But if you can leverage that familiarity, then people can go, I identify this, therefore there's already scaffolding to put like rules text and that sort of thing on for newer players to remember in even like a commander sort of thing where, okay, your deck has 100 cards. Good luck remembering the, 60 odd non-lands.
It's exactly that, right? Where there's like the Flux saga from Doctor Who. It's an iconic moment from the show. It's also a really like unique and easily identifiable name. Pretty cool. Meanwhile, if you're like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, it's a cool name. It is definitely unique and identifiable. Like I think it succeeds in that respect, but then it doesn't have that like resonance factor where it's like I could see someone who doesn't know like Kiki Jiki and isn't like, oh, it's that one super cool card from Cube and like Standard ages ago to be like, yeah, it's the story of that one goblin guy, you know?
And so thinking about targeting things for slightly simpler gameplay without, I don't want to say dumbing it out, while still retaining the kind of rich complexity that we would like. I've been thinking for most of my projects and products, lately, is either have counters be a thing or tokens be a thing, but not trying to double down on both of those, even though those are like counters, tokens, and the graveyard are like 3 of the main things to spice up any given Magic set or Magic environment. But trying to narrow down, okay, if we're doing a bunch of different token types, we'll have a relatively simple counter economy. If we're doing a bunch of counter types, we'll have a relatively simple token economy. That way, if you were playing it in paper, if you have a bunch of like empty magic or empty card sleeves or like coins or dice or anything, it's pretty simple to know, oh, this represents this die with a 5 turned up represents a 5/5 versus, oh, this represents 5+1/+1 counters or 5 time counters on something that's ticking down.
Yeah,
you know
for
what I
sure.
mean? Which has really brought me around to liking amass quite a lot as a mechanic. When I worked on my Morningtide Jumpstart remix, I was like, okay, well, amass is obviously a perfect Kithkin mechanic. Instead of spraying out this go wide, tiny Kithkin strategy, you represent the connectivity, the sort of soldierness of Kithkins. You represent that thought weft connection by saying, okay, we amass Kithkins. We Kithkin amass back in the day. And so it's just, okay, this is a Kithkin army that stacks tall. And so we're not spreading +1/+1 counters everywhere, but there's one type of token and then it just goes tall that way.
Yeah, and like I think it's one of those things where mass is really cool, but for me when I've used it, it fits like similar flavor and complexity profiles, but I found there's times where I'm like, like go tall and go wide do play meaningfully different. And obviously like you're using it for your environment, you knew what you were doing in that respect, right? But then lots of times when I'm thinking I want something that's simpler, but like I'm thinking like I want something that's go wide, and my brain is still fixated in all of this go wide design space. And so when I think about a mass, I'm like, no, I can't do that because I have all of this, I have all these one-off go wide designs, and I'm like, oh, are so cool. I just need a go wide mechanic to work with it. And then I'm like, okay, so am I going to do fabricate? Probably not. Am I going to do and then running down the list. And what I found is decayed tokens are something that I really have been loving for that purpose, where it doesn't create like clogged board states because you attack them once and they're gone. And you can in stat line you can just have like a single thing and say, hey, if I have a bunch of 2/2 decayed tokens, this dice on 6, that's 6 2/2 decayed tokens. And then because they go away as soon as you attack once, unless you're like prepping for an alpha strike, there's lots of times where it makes it a lot easier to read the board. And there's fewer non-decayed tokens, because then it's just like, okay, I'm trading this off aggressively. Also, it just encourages aggression, which is something I think is great for limited. But yeah, you talking about amass reminded me of an adjacent way that I think you can reduce complexity, which is just having some of these resources or something be temporary, which is harder with counters, which is harder with the graveyard. But we've now got this tech for tokens.
Yeah. I think Decayed is very cool with tokens. If you're listening to this, you can contribute to the current You Make the Pack, which is a sequel pack to our Gwemhill pack, which features a mechanic guide debuted called Wind Up, which is my attempt at something similar to Decayed, although I'm not sure how well it works as a Decayed replacement, which is just this creature can't block, and when it attacks, exert it instead of sacrifice it. With the idea being, in most games, this is the equivalent of being able to attack twice, maybe, but it's very frequently similar to Decayed, except you don't have sacrifice synergies. Instead, you have, okay, can I make something out of the fact that I have a bunch of tapped and sitting around, artifact creatures or things like that.
And which, to be fair, you can use the same synergies as Decayed, right? You can use it to tap, you can for Convoke, you can use it to sacrifice, but I think it's almost like you said, it opens up the design space without necessarily removing any of the others. So it has a very broad range of synergies you can include with it. I've liked thinking about designing for an environment with Wind Up.
Wind Up also, like Decayed, can let you put a surprising amount of just power and toughness on the table for relatively cheaply, because it's it's not like it doesn't come with downsides. Your opponent will have plenty of opportunities to engage, and they don't even have to worry about blocking. How would you feel about amass cowards? This is my pitch for a Portal 3 Kingdoms mechanic where we could have this side amass warriors and this side amass cowards. Cowards can't block warriors, or maybe just make it amass cowards and then cowards can't block legends. could be a thing.
Oh, so taking Decade's existing, it feels like a follow-up to what we're talking about, where it's like it's the aggro encouraging part of Decayed in that it can't block, so there's only one thing you can use it for. And combining that with the mass, where it's like, well, this is really good against if they have a few creatures, but then if they can build up something to Alpha Strike, or if they have a way to get around it, it's kind of worse. I like the idea of it being like this flavorful thing of these foot soldiers are kind of like, you have like trained footmen, and then you have people who are just like recruited from the countryside at effectively spear point. And so it's like, yeah, of course that like if you push them hard enough and you see this guy decked out in armor on a horse that's bigger than like 3 of your fellow soldiers stacked side by side, yeah, you're going to break rank. So I think that that's a very mechanically and flavorfully cool way to represent that.
Yeah.
This is also like, I just want to quickly say I haven't read Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so my idea of how the warfare goes, this is me extrapolating based on like the Mahabharata and my cultural touch points for it.
Yeah, in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it is so much about, okay, and it's this general against this general, and we're gonna send our general out to like duel the other general, and like there are soldiers there, and they do matter, but they matter so tiny amount compared to just like if you have those stronger, better, and or smarter general who can win in the duels against all the opponent side, then the enemy army runs away, and your army can go and attack them as that army is running away. Like there's a lot of that sort of interplay, and whether or not your general is good at like, come, my valiant troops, we will be great, or like, well, there'll be a nice shield for me, and then those troops are like, why are we doing this? Our general is not noble or kind or great, because the book is written with certain values in mind and is very clear about who the good guys are.
But in a way, it's described as like these almost superhuman leaders, right?
Absolutely. Well-fed, well-equipped, well-armored, occasionally actually magical. They're so good at Taoism that they've got these magic practices.
Oh, there's so much to dig into there. But the one thing I can say that made me think of without going off into a complete tangent is like, oh, that's why the Dynasty Warriors games are like that.
It's so easy to look at Dynasty Warriors games and be like, wow, it's really just kind of like generic button mashing sort of thing. And then you read the story and you're like, oh, yeah, if I was adapting this, it would probably look a lot like Dynasty Warriors.
But speaking of adapting, we want to...
One tiny last thing, which is, my thought is to really lean on counters matter, not in terms of like types of counters, but just quantity of counters. And so you can either accomplish that by having enough army. You have enough plus one. The threshold I was looking at is 4. If you have 4 counters among permanents you control, or maybe 4 counters among non-land permanents you control, like that's the threshold that everything checks for. We can do like a 4 wins thing, which is very fun. And so like if you've got a big enough army, that's one thing. Or you've got these legendary creatures who are equipped with different stuff. We've got some battles that, if the battle is ticked down, some interesting stuff there maybe.
Yeah, and I think that...
But speaking of adapting...
Well, speaking of battles, I just think that like that's just going back around to, this is so immediately resonant. Like you see this, like a player sees this and it's like, oh, this is the event. It's like what you said about burning a Zinni, except like there's an entire class of card dedicated to it now. It isn't just, oh, this is another card. It's like, oh, I see it in this frame and I know, oh, this is going to be a cool event from my favorite piece of media or whatever. Same thing that sagas, I think, evoke these days. But yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, there's a whole John Woo movie about this battle. I know, the Battle of Redcliffe.
Have we talked about the Battle of Redcliffe before?
Have we talked about the Battle of Redcliffe before? I don't think we have. Do you have opinions about the Battle of Redcliffe?
I don't think, I haven't watched it, but I remember someone telling me about it in the past. So if it wasn't you, this is now 2 people who've recommended that I watch Battle of Redcliffe.
Speaking of battles...
Hey, that also works.
Speaking of meaningful battles that kind of change some things and are intuitive for players coming from a media property into Magic, Kayiu, can you tell me a little bit about Chikyu Ruined Futures?
Sure. So Chikyu Ruined Future is one of many set concepts I've had in my back pocket for a while now, and it's based on Monsters of Chikyu, which is a custom set by Cajun. And that set is essentially an attempt to directly adapt Pokemon into Magic, which we've seen. There's tons of people who've done that, right? What sets Chikyu apart, other than being a full set, is that it specifically isn't trying to do Pokemon as its own like universes beyond thing. It is Pokemon as a plane in the multiverse that other characters can planeswalk to and interact with, and characters from this world can interact with. It is very much like, what if this IP existed within the IP of Magic and not, here is a crossover that acknowledges that they're both separate worlds, which I think leads to a lot of interesting flavor consequences. But ultimately, it means that the bottom line for the actual set is that it keeps it, I think, a little bit more mechanically grounded, or mechanically Magic first as opposed to Pokemon first, while still being resonant, which I think is pretty cool. I think that's something that I'm going to try and carry over into this set.
So one example would be, instead of having a card that is like drowsy, you have Dream Napper, which is a 3-and-a-white 3/2 creature tapir uncommon with flash, and when Dream Napper enters, another target creature phases out until Dream Napper leaves the battlefield. And so like, you're magicifying the Pokemon rather than saying drowsy, creature type drowsy.
Yeah, or like creature type psychic, right? That's a thing that we often see, is like it's a very intuitive and sensible thing, right? Where you're like, Pokemon has types, Magic has types, let's marry the two. Then it makes, what that ends up doing is it puts it in this weird liminal space where it can only be interacted with, it can't only be interacted with, but then there's, the more of that you do, the less you're able to play with those cards in an environment with other Magic cards made by other people, which is kind of, I think that is an interesting thing in project design, where you often have people coming at projects with the goal of, I'm just going to play this with my friends in a solitary setting. And I think lots of times designers in more enfranchised communities need to understand that and realize that sometimes like this type psychic is going to matter, like the type of sets that people on, like, let's say a custom set discords are going to care about, because it's like, oh, okay, they're trying to model and mimic what Wizards of the Coast does. They're trying to make sets that can be played with each other. But if you're not doing any of that, then the world is your oyster, right? But the assumption that you're trying to make a product that's sort of like a little more universally enjoyable by Magic fans, right? Like, I think Pokemon is a weird thing where it's like, okay, everyone's going to know, like, more people are going to know Pokemon than Magic at a certain point. But if you're trying to get something that equally appeals to Magic, as your IPs get like a little bit more, less far-reaching, you want it so that it appeals to the people who are playing your game but might have only cursory or no knowledge of what you're making. I'll send this to you to put in the show notes, but one of my favorite articles that talks about this is Schwa's Unofficial Guide to MTG Fan Sets. And it talks about the aim of projects which aim to bring an existing intellectual property into the mechanics of Magic the Gathering.
So that was Monsters of Chikyu.
Yeah, and the bottom line of all that rambling is that it explains the different philosophies on fan sets and what philosophy Monsters of Chikyu takes. The set I'm doing, Chikyu Ruined Future, is almost adding in a third element, right? We have Magic, we have an outside IP, and now it's adding, in a sense, a genre, I would say. Because you can say that Pokemon, it's like there's so many adaptations, the most famous being like Fallout Equestria, let's say, where it's like you're taking an existing IP, and then you are genre shifting it in a way which retains to some degree the characters, plot, and themes of the original, but completely recontextualized. So Chikyu Ruined Future is a post-apocalyptic take on the Monster of Chikyu setting. In the original set, there's a planeswalker called Sanaito. She's a Pokemon, she's a Gardevoir, but she's also a planeswalker. And she is having troubles after being estranged from her trainer at the time. And while things mostly turn out okay, not completely, but mostly turn out okay in the actual set, Chikyu Ruined Future is like an exploration of like, okay, what if things go bad? She like loses control of her powers, and we get to a post-apocalyptic future. And I think that this is the reason I want to explore this, is because one, there's a lot of cool post-apocalyptic Pokemon fan art out there. the root of this project, like so many things that I love to do, is seeing a piece of art or pieces of art and going, wow, I would love to see that on Magic cards. Specifically, there's a Japanese artist called Astero who has done a bunch of awe-inspiring, post-apocalyptic slash just generally gloomier Pokemon pieces where I was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. And then I was like, oh, there's actually a density of these. There are enough of these that maybe I could make a whole setting out of this. That leads to, I think that as a franchise, I think Pokemon is incredibly hopeful. It is very much a franchise that sincerely and continuously, not just because it's a children's like game or show or whatever, but it makes the conscious choice throughout its stories to engage with the idea that like community can improve us and save us and make us better, even in dire times and even through difficult situations.
Were it not for the corruption and bureaucratic abuses of the 10 eunuchs, we would not have the Yellow Turbans rebellion. And were it not for that, we would not have the era of warlords and warring states that give us the romance of the three kingdoms.
True.
This is my... It's just like Chikyu Ruined Future.
Also, I guess a unique part of this is that, which I kind of buried the lead on, is that I'm designing this set on stream about once a week, usually Sundays at 8 p.m. CST. I go live on Twitch and I work through with people who join me in the community to discuss where the set could go. So for the first stream, it is essentially figuring out mechanical suite and archetypes. And I think that I'm gonna leave off archetypes for now because I think that I don't want to get too far in the weeds here for this one specific project. But I think that we've talked about all this philosophy behind the set, and I think that the exciting and important part is how do you represent that through your mechanics, right? Because you have all these different places that you can draw resonance from, and how do you balance that? So the first thing to look at is what are similar spaces that Magic has explored before. Now, in this case, I'm lucky. I have an existing Magic set that someone else has designed, which is based on the same IP. Oftentimes, this isn't going to be the case, but there's stuff like double-faced cards to represent evolution. There are berry tokens, so there's the idea of using explicitly defined tokens or counters to represent aspects of the world. There's Amity, which is an ability word which cares about exactly 2 creatures attacking. So if there's combat in your IP or combat competition or whatever, what are some ways that you can carry that over into a Magic context? Like, so for example, Amity is supposed to represent double battles, where it doesn't limit you to only having 2 creatures, where like there's a world where you could get 2 lost in the sauce where like, okay, each player can only control 2 creatures. And it's like, no, you want to have it evoke the feeling of what you're copying, but still doing so without imposing restrictions in deck building, drafting, or play. You want it to be opt-in, and you want it to feel good to opt into. So with all of that in mind, I was thinking about what are aspects of Pokemon that could be represented in Magic. And activated abilities that take up a resource to use was something that I was like, oh, okay. This is potential space to explore moves and also limited resources from a post-apocalyptic standpoint, because from bringing that genre, lots of what I was thinking is about how do you create this feeling of like desperation or really like small games sort of resources where it's like each resource matters. You aren't seeing a lot of cards, but each card that you see has additional utility, or you can pour resources into it to make it better. And we're going to circle all the way back around to you talking about counters. Because one thing is that the original Chikyu sets uses +1/+1 counters to represent growth and evolution. And there's explicitly a mechanic called experience, where whenever you attack, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. And I was like, okay, for this sort of set, if there's something that if we want to have a counter that you use as a resource, a counter that is also representing an inversion of what we commonly see to represent like this feeling of something being wrong. I was like, -1/-1 counters feels pretty great. So that was the first mechanic I locked in. -1/-1 counters in some respect. And where that ended up going was, with the help of Juliet, I'm going to actually, let's throw it to you to talk about how we got to the specific -1/-1 counter, because Juliet was in chat and actually gave me the idea for the -1/-1 counter mechanic that I ended up going with.
Okay, so I don't have the MSC file for the current status in front of me. I'm going to see if I can remember this. My pitch for the mechanic was that the number on the card, if it's a 4/4, it would have name of this mechanic 3. So it'd get 3 -1/-1 counters. So it would become a 1/1. And that would be true at basically every scale of creature. But one of the things about that is you probably end up needing to have square power and toughness. I'm not sure where where you evolved from that
That's
idea.
where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think that this gets back to our, again, I have so many connections here, is that we get back to the conversation on Decayed and Wind Up, where it's this idea of this creature that you can kind of expend this resource of their regular like attacking power to get some sort of benefit, but then they shrink to a 1/1. That's still a body on the board that you can then, like we said, sack or tap or whatever. And this set actually has mechanics that do both of those. Because I was thinking, if you're doing like a set that's focused on low resources, desperation, like this post-apocalyptic feel, you want something from the graveyard. You want this feeling of like clawing value out from ruins or whatever. And there's an existing mechanic called Reconstruct, which is essentially flashback, but you sacrifice a permanent, and it's essentially, you can think of it as like flashback emerged almost, where you sacrifice a permanent and the flashback cost is reduced by the mana value of the sacrifice permanent. And so this is an existing mechanic from Lovey, which is a set by Fluffy Deathbringer. And I was like, this seems like a slam dunk. I want to use this as a returning mechanic. And then for tapping, as we were developing the archetypes, it was like, hey, we have a lot of different things that would care about like creatures, right? Like we have this shrinking mechanic, but there's also just this idea of like, how do we make those meaningful in a different way? And we came back to tapping, and it was like, oh, okay, let's bring back Convoke. And then it's this interesting flavor contrast where Reconstruct is kind of hopeful, but it's also, you're having to tear down something of the old to like, or tear down something to bring back something else, right? There is still like a feeling of desperation there in how the mechanic plays out. While Convoke is very much capturing that feeling of, here is community working together. And then final thing, which was, I think we were like, okay, so we have a lot of functional gears that we're putting together here, right? We have like Convoke and Reconstruct, which are held together by this glue of shrinking. There's stuff that cares about removing -1/-1 counters from creatures potentially. So that's another way to like make all these resources tick. So that means there's a lot of little engines that makes each of your cards better than it is at its base on its own, which is both good mechanically for giving this small games feeling, and flavorfully because it adds to this thing of community, adds to this thing of strength in numbers, and so on. The final thing was we need a splash mechanic. And Zangi, another user, suggested, why not battles? They're still fresh and new. Not many people have used them, even in custom spaces. And it incentivizes attacking. It's a good way to encourage people to make early alpha strikes with your shrink creatures. Because otherwise it's like, why would you voluntarily shrink your creature for an attack in the short term rather than waiting to alpha strike? And it's like, okay, battles are a mini alpha strike. So it encourages aggression in the short term to allow you to break through and get resources in the long term.
And it fits Pokemon really well because, if battles fit Romance of the Three Kingdoms, well, yeah, here's the Battle of Redcliffe, here's these different battles. Pokemon battles are so core to the identity, and especially, I don't know if you've decided on gyms as a particular idea, but the idea of, I'm going to take my team of Pokemon, I'm going to alpha strike in this difficult challenge, and some of them may like faint in the process. That is the experience of taking on a gym leader, to get then this like reward that unlocks this next thing, to get this battle that flips over or grants you something on the end.
Yeah, and to go back around to like Pokemon battles being so integral, I've seen so many people who like design Pokemon cards that like directly fight with other cards. And it's like, that's another one where it's like, I get the vision, but you're also missing. I'm not talking about like there's fight spells, obviously, but they design entire sets around the concepts of these creatures have abilities that make them fight. And that's another one where it's like, it feels like you're getting a little too much inspiration from your IP rather than the mechanics of how to play in Magic. I think gyms is perfect flavor for this. Unfortunately, I think that if it's perfect flavor for Pokemon, but then the specific setting here being post-apocalyptic, we're assuming that, the whole gym system is gone. So the idea is it would be battle encounter, where it would be representing wild encounters. And these would be a little bit easier to flip than the battles that we saw in canon with the March of the Machine. And the reason for that is when you defeat it, it flips, you get an experience counter, and all of the backsides of the battle scale with experience counters. So we have a different way to make counters as a resource. We have a different way to represent the scaling or growth of your Pokemon over time. And we do it all in a way that's pretty flavorful, but also encourages things that we like mechanically. I think that's the core of what makes a good mechanic suite. Now, obviously, I'm saying this is a good mechanic suite. Still need to design cards with it, see how it feels. But
You can check that out at twitch.tv/
Kayiu 102. And also, I would like to say there were so many mechanics that we thought of along the way that just didn't make the cut. It was like, oh, okay, we could do like an alt cost mechanic. We could do a Morpholeg. We could do something with like Bradley throw out badge mana. We could do like
I think I suggested
TM equipment.
God, what was the thing in a post-apocalyptic future? Thinking about creatures like a giant Torterra sort of thing that ends up being in space. We could have, instead of creatures that turn into equipment with reconfigure, we could have creatures that turn into fortifications.
But even that, right? Even though it's a little bit like, Juliet, what are you doing? But all of these are.
We call it trespass, and what it is you can exchange combat damage for resources.
But ultimately, it's like you need this brainstorming to get you. And I know that, like, I've mentioned a few times, like, oh, okay, that's a little bit too magic brain, that's a little bit too IP brain. To get to that Goldilocks point of something that's in the middle, let yourself indulge in each of those a little bit and then kind of like pare it down. Like, oh, okay, why is this compelling? And then try to see if there's knobs that you can turn on that. Ultimately, I think that the process of creating cards inspired by IPs, like there's almost, I think, that bell curve meme where at the start it's like, yay, yippee, I love making cards based on my favorite IP, and in the middle it's like, no, you have to make original and serious TM cards, and then once you're more experienced, like, yay, I love making cards for my original IPs, where it's like, I think there's almost like an assumption of unprofessionalism sometimes in making cards inspired by an IP, and it doesn't have to be that way. The only thing that is unprofessional about it is sort of feeling innately judgmental about it. Let it rock and see what happens.
And on the topic of being new to designing Magic cards, or being all sorts of places on the bell curve of Magic cards, and on the topic of designing in social spaces as a way to brainstorm things and get feedback on things, next week is Moxtober! Woo! Moxtober, the yearly daily design opportunity challenge, is coming next week. Yearly because it's every October, and daily because every day for the month of October, folks will be doing some kind of creative project every day to fit the daily prompts. Lots of people design a card each day, and if you are new to Moxtober, you could give that a try. You could write flavor text. We've seen some really fun stuff where people draw cards. You can make a jumpstart pack. The sky is the limit. The cards are your oyster. You can come on down to the Beacon of Creation server. You can go to the MSE server or the Custom Magic server, or typically on mtg.design, they'll have pages for different daily prompts. And I'm excited for this month's Moxtober. It's our 6th Moxtober, maybe?
I only started participating in 2020.
Kayiu and I have been doing this for 4 years.
Yeah. So what are you most excited about for Moxtober? Because I don't know if by this point we'll know the prompts, but I know that you've been working hard to design the prompts list. So outside of that little bit,
I'm excited to see all of the different designs the different folks in the community put out there. There's always some things that really surprise me, whether that's, oh, I made a card with a different keyword based on the prompt each month, or, oh, I made a Mox, or, oh, I made a dual land from a different hypothetical cycle for each month. You don't have to go high concept with it, because individual card designs are also great. Your individual contribution is great, but we see a great influx of people who are either new or are returning to designing in these spaces. And I don't know, I'm a big fan of Christmas, and this is kind of the Christmas month of the game design and card design circles that we are in. And it's also just like a nice excuse or opportunity to get a bunch of designs done. It's like, okay, I can do this each day. I can do whatever this thing is. I put together probably still one of my favorite projects ever, my Dragon's Maze Jumpstart remix, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to do 2 cards each day. And I got half the set in those 31 days because, obviously a Jumpstart set of 10 packs is a different thing than a mega set. But by flexing those muscles each day of a month, by the time you are done, those muscles will be significantly stronger. Even if you are starting out like, oh, I'm not sure. Oh, do I have time? Just work on it a little bit each day. And I think that there's something really nice about that.
Yeah, I think for me, Moxtober, the most exciting parts of it are the same as it is for like my other favorite custom Magic event, which is like the Secret Santa stuff over on MSC, where it's just the idea of interpretation and interpretation and like scale. And I don't mean scale in the sense of like, making a full set versus making a card, but just like, what do you choose to do with this? Is like it's like an extension of interpretation, because there's interpreting the prompt on a card by card basis, where it's like one of the previous years we had school, and then there was like there was the 2 camps of like, this is the fish, this is education, and then you had like a bunch of other more clever interpretations of it. There's also like the idea of like, if you're trying to do something every day, what does that grow into? What is the idea of it? Are there like, do you sort of find yourself emergently making flavorful or mechanical connections between your cards in a way that maybe wasn't intended, maybe was intended from the start?
Yeah, there's an extra part of this, which is not only should you do some fun little design stuff each day, you should show it to people. That's the other thing. How many of us start projects or get halfway through or design dozens of cards or something, and then we don't end up showing them to people because it's only partway through? Well, Moxtober, we are all beginning, we are all partway through, we are all there together. Make something and then show it to people. And if you make something and show it to people each day, like, you do not know what is going to come of that. That is part of what makes it great, is looking at each other's stuff, being inspired by other people's things, being inspired by your own things. By the time it's the 20th, you look at the 10th and you say, oh my goodness, well, here's my through line. So yeah, that's Moxtober, but we're not quite done with September yet. And our September design challenge is to the 9s. Design an equipment card that doesn't use the equip ability.
And then there's bonus points. The clothes make the man, which is the equipment overwrites some characteristic of the attached permanent. And here, get my good side. If it affects power and toughness, it does so unevenly. So not square stats. And whatever bonus points you choose to do, it's still due September 27th, which is 2 days after this episode's going to come out.
Wow. You've just enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where the clothes make the man comes from?
I don't.
In a speech also full of other, even more well-known aphorisms than the clothes make the man, Polonius tells Laertes, and the apparel oft proclaims the man, in Act 1 of Hamlet.
Oh, wow. There was just a discussion at MSC about what Shakespeare plays that we'd seen or read, and I was like, yeah, Hamlet is definitely one big gap in that knowledge for me. So
it's like 2 lines after neither a borrower nor a lender be, and 2 lines before to thine own self be true.
Wow, okay.
So it's a great day to be alive. So that's our podcast for this week. Oh wait, there's more. I may actually try to fit this in earlier. Juliet didn't just read Romance of the Three Kingdoms for fun, although they did have some fun with that. That was a stream incentive for a charity stream we did back in the spring over on the Moonshot Network. Juliet and Riley Hopkins will be doing the Three Kingdoms Spectacular stream on Tuesday, October 1st. So not only can you come join the server, you can come design some cards, you could also check out twitch.tv/Moonshot Network for our Three Kingdoms Spectacular on October the 1st.
And can I plug one last thing? So In addition to Moxtober, there's another custom Magic event that's going to be running throughout October. This is going to be the final iteration of the custom Magic server's Mold Day Cube. 1023, so less than a month from now, or when this comes out, it'll be just under a month from now, is Mold Day. And thanks to community member Dr. Chillbrain's unending passion for science and just Mold Day as like a representation of science education, it's become a yearly event where people come together, make generally goofy science-themed cards, and put it together into a draftable product. This is going to be the last year it runs, both because Chillbrain is graduating and is probably going to have less time to organize it in future years, and also because all good things must come to an end. And Mold Day, I think, unlike Moxtober, where you have an infinite amount of replayability, sure, let's go with that, thanks to new prompts, the core concept of the Mold Day Cube is one that is super close to the hearts of the custom Magic server, but also one that's only has so much that you can draw out of it before it kind of becomes self-referential or stale. So to prevent that from happening and to prevent it from becoming a shadow of itself, this is going to be the last iteration of it. It's going to be going out with a bang. Be there or be non-Euclidean. It's going to be a great time.
It's funny. Literally this morning, I was reading a very long essay on Avogadro's number.
Oh.
It's a mole time to be alive.
And if you want to find me, I'm on Discord at Kayiu102 and on Twitch at twitch.tv/Kayiu102. That's KAYIU102.
And who knows, you might be able to check out future streams of designing Chikyu Ruined Future. Thanks for listening. And always remember,
don't give your money to